Winter 1944. Somewhere along a forgotten stretch of the Eastern Front. The forest was too quiet, not the peaceful, silent of untouched land, but the heavy, unnatural stillness that only comes after destruction. Snow lay uneven across the ground, disturbed by tracks that had already begun to fade. Broken branches marked where men and machines had passed only hours before. The air carried the faint smell of burned fuel and cold metal. Yet there was no movement, no voices, no visible enemy to an experienced soldier. Silence like this was never comforting. It meant something had gone wrong, or something was waiting. At first, no one could say exactly when the battle began. There was no signal flare, no coordinated attack, no sudden barrage. The war did not announce itself in fire or thunder. It announced itself with a single rifle shot, echoing briefly through the trees before being swallowed by the forest. One shot, then nothing. German forward patrols froze in place. Their training demanded caution. A single shot could mean a scout, or it could mean the beginning of a larger engagement. The men waited, their breath formed pale clouds in the cold air. Rifles were raised, but no target could be seen. Minutes passed, then another shot rang out, this time from a different direction. The distance was difficult to judge. The sound seemed closer or perhaps farther. No one was certain, still no movement. The forest offered no shape to shoot at, no muzzle flash, no shadow, only sound appearing and vanishing like a ghost. The German officer in command of the patrol ordered his men to hold position. They were not under heavy fire. There was no clear enemy formation. Yet something was wrong. The shots were too controlled, too measured. Whoever was firing was not panicked. He was deliberate. The soldiers began to whisper among themselves. How many are there? Where are they hiding? Is this a trap? No one could answer. Another shot followed, this time closer still. A soldier at the rear flinched and fell. Struck in the shoulder, the wound was not fatal, but the message was clear. The enemy was not retreating. He was moving, and yet no one could see him. This was not how battles were supposed to begin. There were no lines, no formation, no visible resistance, only uncertainty. What the German patrol did not know was that they were not facing a unit. They were not facing a squad. They were not even facing a pair of soldiers. They were facing one man, a single infantry soldier, separated from his unit during the chaos of night fighting. His name would never appear in official records. His rank would never be confirmed. His actions would be written only in fragmented reports and confused after action summaries, and even those would be questioned, because his battle left no witnesses hours earlier. During a brief but violent clash between advancing forces, the Soviet line had fractured. Smoke, darkness, and snow turned orientation into guesswork. Units lost contact with each other. Orders became meaningless. In that confusion, one soldier found himself alone behind enemy lines. He did not know how far his own forces had fallen back. He did not know whether help would come. He only knew that the forest now belonged to the enemy. Most men in that position would try to escape. Most would hide and wait for night. Some would surrender. He chose none of those. Instead, he listened. He listened to the sound of boots on frozen ground, to the murmurs of German voices carried by the wind, to the rhythm of patrols moving forward. With cautious confidence and slowly, deliberately, he made a decision that no battlefield doctrine could fully explain. He would not flee. He would not reveal himself. He would not fight as a soldier within a unit. He would fight as a presence. The terrain favored him: dense trees, uneven ground, broken visibility. Sound traveled unpredictably. One rifle shot could seem like three. A position could be abandoned before the enemy reached it. Tracks could be confused with older movement. Snow could be used to erase evidence. He chose his first firing position carefully, a shallow rise behind a fallen tree. From there, he could see a narrow corridor of movement, where German troops were likely to pass. He waited long enough to observe, long enough to understand their rhythm. Then he fired once, not twice, not rapidly, just once, and he moved immediately. This was the foundation of the battle that would follow. Fire, move, vanish. Every position was temporary. Every shot was a question, not an answer. The Germans attempted to respond with logic. They assumed a small Soviet reconnaissance unit was operating in the area. They spread out, trying to flank an enemy that did not exist in numbers. Each movement created new vulnerability. Another shot, different direction, same precision. Their assumptions began to collapse. If this was a unit, it was moving too quickly. If it was a scout team, it was too bold. If it was a trap, it was too silent. Confusion replaced certainty. Reports sent back to command were cautious and vague. Enemy presence confirmed, strength unknown. Fire from multiple directions. None of it was technically false. None of it was fully true because there was no they. There was only he, the lone soldier, was not attempting to defeat the enemy in the traditional sense. He was not seeking destruction. He was seeking doubt. His objective was not to kill, but to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Each shot was a whisper. You are not alone here. You are being watched. You do not understand what you are facing. As the hours passed, the German patrol halted its advance. Officers debated their next move. Artillery support was considered. Then delayed reconnaissance units were requested. Then redirected. The forest had become dangerous, not because of visible force, but because of invisible intent. Men feared what they could not confirm, and that fear began to reshape their behavior. Meanwhile, the single soldier continued to move. He conserved ammunition. He avoided repetition. He selected positions that forced the enemy to question distance and direction. His footprints overlapped older tracks. His presence blended into the chaos already left by war. No one ever saw him clearly. No one could describe his face. No one could even agree on how many there were. Some believed they faced a platoon. Others suspected an entire concealed unit. A few feared something worse, a deliberate ambush designed to lure them deeper. None considered the possibility that they were being held in place by one man. By late afternoon, the forest had become a zone of hesitation. German movement slowed, orders were cautious. Scouts advanced only in pairs. Every sound became a potential threat. Every shadow carried weight. The lone soldier had achieved something few could claim. He had reshaped the battlefield without being seen. He had turned his absence into a weapon. But this was only the beginning, because the longer the enemy remained uncertain, the greater the consequences would become. Command decisions would be altered. Timelines would shift, reinforcements would be misdirected, and all of it would be based on a presence that could not be confirmed. The forest remained silent again as night approached. But now it was a different silence. Not emptiness, not calm. It was anticipation. And somewhere within it, a single soldier, prepared to move once more. The question was no longer whether he could remain unseen. The question was how long an entire force could be controlled by a man no one could find, and what would happen when they finally tried to destroy what they could not see. By nightfall, the forest had become something more than terrain. It had become a threat. German command could no longer treat the situation as a minor skirmish. The reports arriving from the forward patrols were too consistent. In one detail, the enemy was present, active and impossible to define. Shots had been fired from at least 5 different directions. Distances varied, angles contradicted one another. No bodies had been found. No confirmed Soviet position had been identified. Only uncertainty remained. To trained officers, this was deeply troubling. War depended on clarity. Even chaos followed patterns. But this did not behave like a unit. It behaved like intention itself. Something was shaping their movement without showing its form. They assumed professionalism. They assumed coordination. They assumed numbers. They were wrong on all 3. The lone soldier now operated almost entirely in darkness. The snow reflected faint starlight, but the trees swallowed it quickly. Visibility was poor and sound traveled unpredictably. A snapped twig could echo like a footstep. A breath could sound like movement. He understood this instinctively, not from doctrine, but from survival. He no longer fired to strike. He fired to redirect one shot from the east, then silence. 30 minutes later, a shot from the south, then nothing each time German patrols shifted their orientation. They realigned their weapons. They repositioned their men. They committed time and energy to responding to something that had already moved. The soldier was not fast. He was patient. His movement was deliberate, slow, calculated. He never rushed. He never repeated patterns. He understood that repetition created predictability, and predictability meant exposure. His greatest weapon was not his rifle. It was his restraint, German commanders began to suspect. A reconnaissance detachment was operating deep behind their lines. That alone was dangerous. It suggested that Soviet forces were closer than expected. It meant the front line was unstable. It meant their map no longer matched reality. Orders were adjusted. An armored unit scheduled to advance at dawn was delayed. Artillery support was kept in reserve. Scouting elements were doubled. All of this was done to counter a force that did not exist. Within the forest, the lone soldier watched the enemy grow more cautious. Their movement slowed, their confidence thinned. Where they had walked openly before, they now crouched and waited. Where they had spoken, they now whispered. He had changed their behavior, but this control was fragile. One mistake would end it, one wrong shot, one misplaced step, one moment of impatience. He was exhausted, cold, hungry. His hands trembled not from fear, but from strain. Still he continued. Near midnight he took his greatest risk. He allowed himself to be heard moving, just barely, enough to be interpreted as careless movement by an advancing unit. The Germans responded instantly. Flares lit the sky, machine guns fired into the trees. Shadows were shredded by light and noise, but there was no one there. By the time they reached the position, the snow showed no fresh prints. The ground was untouched. The illusion deepened. Now they believed they were facing disciplined professionals. Now they believed they were being studied. Inside, German command doubt became institutional. Maps were redrawn, intelligence officers argued. Was this a screening force? A delayed counterattack? A baiting maneuver? None of it made sense, and that was what made it powerful. The lone soldier had created something rare in war, a problem that could not be solved by firepower. He could not hold this forever. He knew that he was buying time, not for himself, but for something larger, for the enemy to hesitate, for uncertainty to spread upward through the chain of command. He had become invisible influence, yet the danger grew with every hour. The Germans would eventually saturate the forest. They would sweep it methodically, and when they did, there would be nowhere left to vanish. The question was no longer whether he could remain unseen. The question was whether invisibility could survive determination, and whether one soldier could escape a battlefield that now existed only because of him. Morning came without resolution. The forest remained intact, untouched by battle yet burdened by the memory of something unseen. Frost settled over footprints that never led to a body, snow-covered positions that had never held a unit. To German patrols, the terrain no longer represented safety or distance. It represented uncertainty, and uncertainty was now a form of threat. At first light, reconnaissance teams were ordered forward, not to attack but to confirm. Their task was simple: locate the enemy, identify the force, restore clarity. Yet even this simple order revealed how deeply the situation had shifted. No one expected an engagement. They expected confusion. The men advanced slowly, not because they feared gunfire, but because they feared not understanding where it would come from. They moved in pairs, each step measured, each pause deliberate. Their eyes searched for signs that were not physical. No trenches, no supply caches, no wounded, only the possibility that something had been there. But the forest offered nothing. No spent shell casings were found, no blood, no confirmed firing positions. It was as if the shots had been imagined, yet they had casualties. They had wounded men. They had recorded times and directions. The evidence existed. The source did not, German officers began to consider, a possibility they found deeply unsettling, that their enemy had not been a force, but an event, something that had occurred, reshaped behavior, and vanished without leaving structure behind. This contradicted everything they were trained to expect. Armies left patterns, units, left organization, men left mistakes. But this had left only hesitation. Higher command was notified that the sector was now unstable. That single word carried heavy consequences. It meant the advance could not resume until clarity was restored. It meant artillery and armor were kept in reserve. It meant a schedule built on momentum was now fractured. Time in war was not neutral. Every delay was a victory for someone. And the lone soldier had created delay, without ever being identified within his own reality. However, there was no sense of victory. There was only survival by dawn. He had already withdrawn deeper into the forest. His movements became slower. Hunger had dulled his strength. Cold had stiffened his joints. Each breath felt heavier than the last. He no longer fired, not because he had achieved his goal, but because firing was no longer necessary. The enemy was already restrained by what they believed he represented. His presence had become permanent in their thinking, even after he had gone. This was the most dangerous moment of all, not when he acted, but when his absence was misinterpreted as preparation. The Germans now believed they were being watched by a force that had chosen not to reveal itself. Their caution intensified, their formations tightened, their movements slowed, every decision carried added weight. They were no longer responding to reality. They were responding to expectation, and expectation was stronger than evidence. Within 2 days, the forest was bypassed entirely. Command chose to advance elsewhere. Rather than force an engagement with an enemy that could not be defined, the terrain was labeled contested. Though no contest had occurred, it became a blank space on the map, marked only by uncertainty. This is how the battle ended. Not with surrender, not with withdrawal, not with victory, but with avoidance. The lone soldier never appeared in reports, because there was nothing to record. No encounter, no capture, no body, only altered behavior. And behavior did not fit neatly into military documentation. His war had been invisible, and so was its conclusion. What remains is a rare example of how a single human presence, unconfirmed and unseen, can shape strategy without ever becoming a target. Not through firepower, not through numbers, but through doubt. And the question that still lingers is not what he accomplished, but how many similar events vanished into history, simply because no one could prove they had truly happened. The forest fell silent once more. No one ever saw him leave. No one ever confirmed his presence. Command reports noted anomalous enemy activity, yet no one could assign a name, a unit, or even a body to it. In official history, the sector was listed as delayed due to resistance, a neutral phrasing that concealed the truth. A single soldier had rewritten the behavior of an entire force, without ever being confronted. In the decades that followed, the story was buried after action. Reports were summarized, maps were revised. Any witness who might have remembered the confusion faded into ordinary accounts of the war. Soldiers who survived were never asked the right questions. Documents were classified, misplaced, or quietly forgotten. This soldier existed only in fleeting echoes. A shot that never had a source, a shadow that never had a form, a hesitation that changed the course of a small but critical operation. He was not a hero in official records. He was not an enemy in enemy reports. He was a ghost, a presence that shaped reality while remaining unseen. And in the end, that is why history forgot him. Because what cannot be measured, catalogued, or confirmed is often treated as if it never happened. But for a few hours in that winter forest, one man was more powerful than an army. And the forest remembers, the question remains, how many battles were silently won by those the world never recorded? Silence is history's greatest weapon.